The following is brought to you by Total Seal Piston Rings, the leader in ring seal technology. TotalSeal.com. Hidden Horsepower by Total Seal is back. Hello, everyone. I'm Joe Castello, WFO Joe, and we've got another great show for you. If you're new to the podcast, click subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, because we are going to continue our tour of famous engine builders and all kinds of great stuff with Keith Jones, the Director of Technical Sales at Total Seal. Keith, welcome back. How are you?
I'm doing great, Joe. Appreciate you having me back on. We got a slightly overcast day in Phoenix, which is okay. It's the number 2 sunshine capital of the country, and to have an overcast day here, it's okay. We'll take it.
There it is. And I don't look at it like I'm having you on. I look at it like you're having me on. I'm thrilled that I get to do this, especially on a day like this. Now, as you know, drag racing is near and dear to both of our hearts, but we love all forms of motor racing, and there are a lot of high-performance racing engines out there in the world. And so this week, for the first time, we're going to kind of expand beyond the drag racing engine builders into the world of sprint cars, which has got to be one of the most popular forms of weekly racing in the country. And we're going to go to Pennsylvania, talking about York Springs, Don Ott Racing Engines. Don, a legend from around those parts. Keith, to be able to work with Don on a pretty regular basis, someone who has had great success and has been building engines professionally since the early 90s, that's got to be very educational at the very least.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed every minute of working with Don, and Don and I have been working together for the little over 23 years that I've been working here. He's not only a great customer, he's also a very good friend, and that's not something I put out there, real easily. I've got a small group of friends and a tight group, and Don's definitely one of them, and appreciate working with Don every day. And one of the things I really enjoy about Don is he's an innovator. He's willing to try anything. I throw an idea out, and he's like, oh, yeah, you better send that to me. I think I got to give that a try. He's not afraid to try something new, as we all know in just about every form of motorsports, from, circle track racing to drag racing to, planes, trains, and automobiles. Are those guys that are kind of, rooted into doing things a certain way. And, this is how we've always done it. And that's how I've been taught. And Don's not one of those guys. He's really very open to trying new things and trying old things. There's things that we've done over the years that, in designs of, heads and pistons and, every part of the engine that, we tried at one time and it didn't work out. And, Don's one of the guys, he's willing to come full circle. And, we tried that back in the 90s and it really didn't work right. But, with today's technology and today's manufacturing abilities, maybe we should look at that again. And, again, Don's one of those guys. I give him those great, those accolades that he's willing to dive in and try just about anything, at least once.
So without further ado, let's bring him on from Don Ott Racing Engines in York Springs, Pennsylvania, the man, Don Ott. Don, do you agree with what Keith just said? Is he accurate in his portrayal of you?
I would say he's pretty accurate, yeah. I mean, we've been good friends for a long time. He's helped me out a lot in, piston ring knowledge, and we became friends over the years. Actually, I went to Phoenix with my motorhome a couple years ago, and we went out and had a beer together, so it was pretty cool. And when he gets this way, he stops in, and we'll go out and have a bite. So, he's definitely a good friend and a great knowledge on piston rings and piston ring seal. Great to talk to.
We've been starting off these interviews with some general questions, and then ultimately you guys will, delve into a conversation that inevitably is over my head. But I know that the audience appreciates what you guys are doing, but knowing and understanding from having seen what happens in a sprint car race, it appears to be an absolute torture chamber for the engine. On and off the throttle control, really how you steer the car from my understanding, and, these great wheel-to-wheel, side-by-side battles, none of that can happen if the driver and team doesn't have reliable power. That's where you come in. Talk a little bit about some of the engines that you build and have built, and ultimately we'll go into the importance of having quality piston rings to keep them going.
Well, yeah, they definitely are a unique engine. The cars do anything but go straight, and they're off and on the ground. So, there's a lot of RPM fluctuation. They're hard on the drive line, and it sends it the harmonics right through the rings, and that's part of ring seal too. Is some of those vibrations we see in the engine, trying to dampen that out. But I build mostly 360 ASCS style engines, California Open 360s, and World of Outlaw type 410. That's the kind of the engines I build. There's a little series here in Pennsylvania, 358s they call them, and I might have a half a dozen or so customers that run that. But I've been doing it since I was, 18 years old or something. I'm 53 now, and it just seems like we've tried a lot of different stuff over the years, and Keith's helped me along the way, and I appreciate everything he's done for me.
And as well as I appreciate everything Don said. And one of the things that Don brought up, and a lot of guys, especially drag race guys and people that aren't as experienced, a sprint car engine is direct coupled. There's no transmission. This is, you've got an in and out box on this thing. So what he brought up about vibration, you've got every bit of driveline vibration going through the engine. There's no quote-unquote flywheel or dampening device. There's no torque converter. There's no harmonic balancer. These things, it is a vibration, just devastating torture chamber inside that engine, because every single thing it feels, it goes through the driveline. It's just like a boat porpoising across the water. Every time the prop comes out of the water, the RPM shoots up, it comes back down, hits the water, it slams back down, drops the RPM, and all that harmonic distortion that goes through the crank, through the block, is the same thing a sprint car sees. You see this just rapid acceleration and deceleration, in the bottom end, and of course, another integral part is the engine is part of the frame. So this this little car with a ton of power is twisting and flexing and trying to move the block every direction it can. As Don stated, it's an absolute torture chamber. It's really hard on everything, rings especially, and it makes it a real hard environment to pull a vacuum in the crankcase. And that's one of the things Don's really worked on. He and I have worked on a lot over the phone. Is getting the gapless top ring in there to really help seal this thing up, get cylinder finishes right, get everything in there as right as we can, because it's extremely difficult to pull a vacuum in the bottom end of a sprint car engine, as it is in any engine, but much easier in, say, a drag race car that doesn't have that kind of a torture chamber. So I know Don has worked diligently on getting all of those things right so that he can pull vacuum in the engine, which I can say straight up not a lot of guys in the sprint car world do. And I know Don's worked hard on that, and he may want to touch on that subject.
It's funny, going back to the start of Total Seal rings, back, I'm going to say, in the early 90s, I started using them mainly because customers had milky oil all the time. They would bring an engine in and say, they were checking the valves on it or something, there's oil. The oil is all milky and it sits around the valve covers. So one of the first things I bought Total Seal rings for was I felt it kept the oil free of methanol. The methanol, we run these things so rich at idle that unless the customer is really sharp at getting them leaned out, they like to milk the oil, and then that's a bearing problem. So that's how I got started with Total Seal, and I felt that worked. And then, over the years, we started finding power more so than a non-milky oil. But that's how it all started, and it started with a piece of candy in the box, and that was always good. They since discontinued that candy amongst my protests, but yes, so over the years, the engines are pretty much the same, bore and stroke wise. Not a whole lot's changed there, but ring seals come a long way, piston development's come a long way, and we got them to now where we don't have any blow by. We can actually draw a little bit of vacuum on a 410, which is hard to do unless you got a super big pump, which most sprint cars run a 4-stage pump because there's not enough room to get a longer pump and it hits the radiator. Over the years, we've went with thinner rings, different cylinder finishes, and I think we finally are on to something that we make really good power, and I'm happy to have been with Total Seal for 30 years.
Obviously, the listeners can't see this. I just texted Don a picture of about a 20-year-old piece of candy that I've got sitting on my desk. So he should get a kick out of that. I can just real quick. The company that made the candy went out of business, and we've searched and searched. We had a custom logoed candy that had our company name, Total Seal Piston Rings, and I kid you not, people would call up if they were missing a piece of candy in their box. These people were upset. It was like, I didn't get my candy. It's something we were really known for years.
Yeah, that was good stuff back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, don't eat it, Keith. Don't eat it.
That one don't look real tasty.
There you go.
We're off topic. I mean, people would call me, Joe, all the time. They'd want to know what they do with it. And I'm like, do I crush it up? Do I put it in the oil? Do I rub it on the parts? And I'm like, no, you pop it out of the plastic and put it in your mouth. It's a piece of candy.
That's hysterical. That is hysterical.
And I just wanted to touch again, I don't mean to keep going on. Don's reason for putting the gaffle string is the same reason that I was introduced to the gaffle string. Decades before I ever came to work here, I got involved with a mechanical fuel-injected drag car, and exactly the same reason as Don got started, where a lot of people start. I couldn't stop milking the oil. I was puking the oil out of this thing every pass. I'd make a quarter oil every run. And it really took me a solid year to figure out that fuel system with the help of a gentleman, Fast Eddie. Everybody's got a Fast Eddie, but our Fast Eddie here in Phoenix helped me out and sort that fuel system. And that was how I started with the Total Seal ring. And in many cases, that's a single reason to have it, the gapless. It just keeps all the junk and the crap out of the oil, so it's not breaking the oil film down. It's not contaminating the oil. And like I said, that's how I was introduced to the part initially.
Right. And, it's funny, back then, there was guys that thought, Total Seal, that's a waste of money. It's kind of snake oil, put a gapless ring on a second ring is the wrong thing to do because it tries to lift the top ring off the land and, you know what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. But it's funny because over the years, Total Seal has become the force in making rings. I mean, from drag racing to NASCAR to Formula One to everything, and I'm going to say 30 years ago, you said Total Seal, most engine builders looked at you like you were just getting robbed, like you're wasting your time. But I never believed that, and I think that, it proved that business just come a long way.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate that compliment. We really tried hard to do, the best possible ring in every design that we tackle, to produce the best part out there, and I appreciate that compliment.
Don, talk a little bit about the challenge of staying, up with the cutting edge in sprint car racing. You mentioned, the engine sizes are pretty much the same, and I understand why that is. It's about, the cars and the racing and the fun and the driver and the big move at the end of the race. At the same time, you've got to give these guys power. They can't do that. But they also need throttle response. Like, what is important when building an engine for one of these cars if someone's going to go out there and compete and win? And how do you accomplish that?
Well, reliability it starts with the parts that you buy. Back when I first started, I would work on anybody's stuff that come in the door, and they would bring baskets of parts in, and you'd put them together, and they would go tell their buddy, we got a brand new Ott engine in tonight, which the only thing new was the rings and the bearings. It was pistons and rods from you don't know where they were. They brought them from somewhere, and that engine would run good, but it usually wouldn't run long, and next thing you know, the owner was not very happy because, his engine blew up. So that's one of the first things I did was start weeding out some of the people who brought used parts in here. And I would just buy, it wasn't worth my reputation of putting somebody's motor together to save them a couple bucks. And in the end, they're going to trash me. So, starting with quality parts is, reliability is the key. If the engine runs all night long, they don't have to take their hood off. They can concentrate on their car. It's way better for the racer not to have to be working on the engine all night. So, like I say, I bought quality parts and didn't use used parts no more from customers, and that helped, the reliability tremendously, to where, then I gained more customers because my stuff was running good. It was finishing. It was finishing well, and my business exploded. I started at Bob Weikert's. If anybody knows sprint car racing, Bob Weichert shop. I started out of there. It was just a race car shop. We had a valve seat grinder, and a valve facer, and a pressure washer, and that's all we had, in a Magnaflux machine. And I had Charlie Garrett, which is a well-known engine builder. He used to hone my blocks and resurface my blocks and heads and balance my cranks. And, over the years, I grew from that to build a house, put my business in my basement, and then, build a garage out back. And at one time, here in central Pennsylvania, there's a 24-car field. That's what starts to feature. And 18 of them would be my engines. It went from me being a one-man band to having 6 full-time employees, and that all just became, I think, just because of using quality parts and not sacrificing money for inferior parts. That's what grew my business, I believe.
Yeah, and I've got to say, and it's not just the parts, though. It's the quality and the effort. Don's, had mentioned, building the shop in his basement, which he did, but now he's a beautiful standalone shop, big place, all the fun toys, and just the diligence. Again, that, the quality and the time that it takes to put these engines together and to, make sure everything's right about it, not cut corners. There's engine guys out there in every respect that just, that slam them together just to get them out the door. And then there's the guys that, they look at every single detail, and the quality of parts and the attention to detail is, a big part of why Don's been successful and has engines that go out and run night after night after night that, that the guys don't have to mess with. And like Don said, they can concentrate on the car, concentrate on their setup, and go out there and win races.
Now, you grew up next to a sprint car legend. Is that correct, Don? So you couldn't have gotten away from this if you wanted to.
No, I grew up next to Fred Raymer, and we started racing modifieds back. I'm going to say, I think he started in 1977. I would have been 11 years old then, when he was probably 17. I think he's about six or 7 years older than me. But he definitely got me interested in racing, and that's what I've been doing ever since. I got to thank him a lot for ruining my life and making me miserable working 7 days a week, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Now, Keith mentioned that you are open to his ideas, and Keith has taken on his own personality on the show here, and it's interesting because he's always soliciting, people say, call me, if you got a question, call me. You just mentioned something that he says all the time, like if you're going to spend a lot of money buying the best parts to go fast, don't overlook the piston rings. In fact, make that be your first call or your first thought, so that we can build around it. He did reference early on that, sometimes old ideas become new again, and the technology has advanced, and something that wasn't working in the past, it's now working, and it's better than ever. The gapless ring you guys spoke about, a perfect example. And he cited you as willing and open to try new things. Can you give us an example of something that maybe you didn't think was going to be a good idea that turned out to be a good idea? You mentioned the gapless ring already. As someone who is constantly working on these things, I know you see a lot, and maybe you try something here and there and find something and hit on something that works. I'd love to know if you have any examples.
Well, yeah, back in the day, we used to use just a 16th, 16th, 3/16th ring package that, had super amounts of tension, and you could, hardly turn the short block over when you got it together. And, not knowing any better, that was just what I thought everything was. But, I would talk to Keith on the phone. He says, Don, you really need to, think about your ring package. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he would say, well, we ought to try smaller rings. And I'm like, okay, so he would say, here, I'll, get it custom, get your piston made to this groove and this, radial and give this a try. So I'm like, okay, I'll try it, Keith. So, and everything he's ever told me has definitely increased power, and you could tell putting the thing together, how easy it turned over, that it has to be less drag and make more power, and generally it did. And then, then it went, from 16th to 1.5 rings to an 043, and then he's like, oh, you got to try this. It's like an 031 or something, top ring, and I'm like, you're crazy. It's hard to even put together, it's so thin, it's hard to get in the bore. But, everything there, is, everything's been worth power, over the years we've worked on that, and now that my business has slowed down a little bit, I am I used to have hired guys that would do my honing, but now I feel like I slowed down. I don't have to do as many engines a year because I lost some customers or people retired, so anyway. So now I'm doing all the block work, and I feel I can control everything a little better. Because you tell your employee to do something, you don't know what you're getting. But now that I do all the honing, I feel like the repeatability and everything is so much better. But back in the day, I remember telling Keith this. I believe when I first got my dyno, I would put an engine on, and we'd run pulls, and it was just puking oil out of the breather on the valve cover, and we would change cylinder heads right on the engine, trying to, different combinations. And, we go from a small cylinder head to a big cylinder head, and the power would be the same, But, he's like, man, you're not sealed up. If you're pushing oil out, you're not sealed up. That's your problem, because we changed heads, and the engine would run exactly the same because that's all it would make, because that's all, our ring seal was good for. So with his help over the years, we got that way under control. And now the most, horsepower I've ever seen, I think, is in rings versus cylinder heads back in the day. Like I would change heads and see nothing, and he got me on a different ring package and gas porting and stuff like that. And then next thing you know, pick up 50 horsepower, and it wasn't because of cylinder heads, because I finally started seeing the light and getting sealed up.
Don's worked so hard, and it's all like we've discussed so many times, and it's all a package. Everything's got to work together. That piston, that ring, that cylinder head. The engines. You think about it, it's a naturally aspirated engine. So if the rings aren't doing their job, one, you're going to have blow by. You're going to have pressure getting by the rings. It's going to go in the pan. It's going to get up into the valve cover. It's going to huff oil out. But with all the hard work that Don does, and guys like him working on intake manifolds and cylinder heads and camshaft profiles. It's a normally aspirated engine. End of the day, it's only as good as the ring seal is on the intake stroke. If the ring's not sealed, it's not filling the cylinder. It's the ring's job to pull all the air, all the fuel. And optimizing that ring seal on the intake stroke from, making sure you've got good ring-to-ring groove clearances, proper bore finishes, proper bore geometry, the gapless ring, all of those things help seal the ring better on the intake stroke. So now Don's got more air, more fuel. He's got the potential to make more power, and that's kind of one of the big things that Don and I have worked on. And he's always been so receptive to ideas and trying different things. Like I said, kind of early on, there's some guys that are kind of stuck in the mud, and who are you to tell me different? And hey, I'm no expert, but I deal with so many guys out there, and I get feedback from these people like Don. Hey, I did this and it did that, or I did this and it did that, and I really like that. And we're kind of a big database, and you get some knowledge about what works and doesn't work, and able to to share that information with the different people. And we were talking about things that kind of come around, and rings have gotten much thinner. The blocks have gotten thinner and lighter. The sprint car blocks move around like a house with a busted foundation. I mean, these things are so lightened up, and all the work Don's got to do to get everything really good bore geometry wise. And we talked about things that have come back around. There's a lot of different piston designs out there these days, and Don has tried all kinds of them. One of the ones that he's kind of seeing some success with, again, is a design that was real popular a few years ago, puts a little more stability in the piston, we'll say a little bit less radical piston design, and voila, he's stepped it up again, kind of revisiting an old design that 10 years ago was like, that's old school. But, there's things to it that actually work pretty well in his application. There's, an old oil ring design we call the black oils, and they stopped making those years ago. They're real popular in like Top Fuel cars and, blown alcohol cars. And they kind of went out of existence in the late 90s. And, a few years ago, myself and Matt got looking at those oil rings and kind of saw something in design, says, you know what, it's not for everything, but in that particular application, this is a better design. We need to bring these back on, start tooling up, start making these again. And we did, and they've been a great success in that arena. And, like I said, just because a part was the thing used 10 years ago or 15 years ago doesn't necessarily mean it's not good. A lot of things get revisited, and you find it, like I said, Don's been playing with some piston designs that he tried a few years back, and guess what? They're working good now.
Yeah, I believe it's all, like we revisited that shape of piston, but we have way better ring lands now, way better rings. So what you thought didn't work yesterday, you made some adjustments to just a ring package on it, and now it's a much stabler piston, and it shows up.
Don, what would you say is the greatest challenge for what you do? We watch the racing, sprint car racing, on any given Saturday night. There might be more sprint cars out there than any other type of race car. If we're talking across America, maybe bracket racing in the drag racing universe. But it is very popular all over the country and certainly in certain areas. But as an engine builder, what would you say is your single greatest challenge to make one of these things live? You already mentioned the harmonics. I know that drivers want throttle response. They want the power immediately. So when you're tackling one of these things in engine design, give us a little insight into what is your highest hurdle.
Well, the drivability, because the tracks change so much. You may start, we'll just say, with a 15-second lap in warm-ups, and by feature time, it might be 21 seconds. So, you lose 6 seconds on a 15-second trip. It's a big percentage of loss. So if you start with, say, 900 horsepower, and the track slows up that much, it just wants to spin the tires all the time. So the hardest thing is to be able to have a motor that'll go fast as hell when it's 15 seconds, but then when it's 20 seconds, you can control it. Be able to throttle the thing and keep the tires under it. It's kind of like driving in the ice at that point. So I'm going to say that's the biggest challenge with sprint car racing is trying to set quick time and then be able to out traction everybody and keep the wheels under it.
Makes sense. Keith, any final questions for Don as we wind down this edition of Hidden Horsepower? I know that you guys have worked very well together, built many engines, and have shared some of the insight and secrets. You got anything for him?
Well, it's more on a personal note. How was the snowmobile trip, Don?
It was good. It wasn't long enough. My buddies that I go with, they're back up there again this week, so every night they're sending me pictures and laughing at me and stuff. So, but no, it was great. It's great to get away.
Killing you.
Yeah, it's great to get away. We went up to the province of Quebec for a week, and I rode 1,478 miles in 7 days. So we get quite a bit of time on the seat, but it's fun. We have a good time, and every night we cut up and carry on, have a couple cocktails, call it happy hour, and get up next morning and go again. But it's good to clear your head, because the whole time you're riding, you're just thinking, thinking about the next step or what which direction you should head, camshaft or piston design or cylinder head, or it's good to get away and be out of the racing or away from your employees, and just clears your head. So I enjoyed my trip to Quebec.
I'm glad you did, and we all need that. We all work very, very hard in this industry, and trying to like you said, make power, make something reliable, but you got to have that decompression time to, like you say, kind of fluff the clouds out of your brain, and like you say, ride the snow machine, and and like you say, think about heads and cams and blocks and what's the next thing, because Don knows like we know. I mean, there's one of the comments Don made was about keeping the wheels underneath it, and 900 horsepower, and by the end of the night they could probably get away with 800 horsepower, but they never ever ask for less. I have never had a single racer ever come at me and say, you know what, could you knock about 50 horsepower out of my junk because I just can't use it. Never happens. So we're always trying to find the next thing.
Yeah, that's the thing, is getting to detune them. There's a lot of different things guys are trying right now to detune them, and restricting the throttle sizes way down. Taking timing out. It's just whoever get the motor detuned the best, because our motors hit so hard now. I got a motor that makes almost 1,000 horsepower on my dyno, so it's hard to drive when it gets slick.
Oh, I bet it is. I can only imagine, because I'll tell you, Don being in the heart of Pennsylvania and the Pennsylvania posse, and those guys are just, they're unstoppable. They're incredible. And as deep as I am a drag race guy, to me, there's just nothing more exciting than watching sprint cars on the track, and especially when the guys step up and take the wing off the top. Now that's crazy.
Yeah, yeah, them guys. I don't know what they're thinking, but. I drove a sprint car just practicing one time, and I remember telling it was Fred Raymer's car, and the thing's out of control. A quarter throttle it's unbelievable how fast it goes and how much traction it has, and I got out of the car and I called him every word I could think of, and I said, if you ever tell me that motor don't run again, you're a liar. I think I was going like 25 seconds and he was going 18 seconds, and I'm like, how do you even get the full throttle? And he's like, oh, you got to run at full throttle, then it's easy to drive full throttle. I'm like, my head can't tell my foot to do that.
Exactly.
Them cars are, you watch Kyle Larson or Christopher Bell, them guys, they go back and forth between stuff. And it's amazing how they do it, because a sprint car does anything but go straight. The right rear tire is 12 inches bigger around than the left rear tire. And, all that power, when you hit the throttle, it wants to go to the right. And then with all the compression, we're running 16.5 to 1. You roll out of the pedal, it wants to stop like a Jake brake, and then it goes to the left. So it's I don't know how these guys drive them. It's pretty incredible that 24 of them start side by side and don't have a crash every time.
Yeah, and you are
amazing.
And you're making the power. Don, at the end of each one of our episodes, I like to ask our guest, a question that I feel like can be beneficial to me and to everyone that is listening out there in terms of, advice for the next generation, the people who are coming up that will hopefully become interested in motorsport and engine sports, and they're coming along the next way. You've mentioned you've been doing this for a long time, and you've had great success, and it has been your life and your living, and you're still doing it to this day, and you're passionate about it. So if you have any advice, like what would it be to the relatively young person, a person early in life who is going down this road, thinking about this kind of stuff? What would your advice be?
Well, just perseverance. You want to be good at it, you got to put the time in, and eat, sleep, and breathe it. That's what I've always done. I was fortunate to have a good wife that raised my kids, and while I was at the racetrack and at the shop trying to make them faster and go on the racetrack and tuning on them. So I want to say, if you want to be good at your trade, it's just a matter of you got to really work at it.
There you go. Don, thank you so much. Excellent work. We appreciate you coming on Hidden Horsepower by Total Seal and giving us some details of what's going on at Don Ott Racing Engines, and we wish you the best of luck in the coming racing season.
Thanks a lot, Joe.
Thanks, Don. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Keith.
Don Ott from Don Ott Racing Engines. Keith, wow, very interesting hearing you guys talk about it, and the fame of Keith Jones extends beyond drag racing.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't know about fame, maybe more like shame.
Legend?
But yeah, we got our hands kind of stuck into a little bit of everything. They're all engines and they run in different environments, but we've got our fingers into a bit of everything.
To me, that's what's new and interesting and fun to think about is the environment, whether it be those harmonics you were talking about. You referenced a couple of times early on in the shows, and I know at some point we'll speak with someone from the water world, the marine side of things. But to make something live in those conditions and perform to its maximum potential, that is what is interesting. And so excellent job with that. And just like that, Keith, another episode in the books.
Well, thank you, Joe. I appreciate it, and I appreciate everybody tuning in again. And keep coming back, because we'll come up with more.
What if they've got a question for you, Keith? What should they do?
As always, you can reach out to me. You can get to me through the website. You can email me. You can call me at Total Seal. Any of those. The toll free is 800-874-2753. Myself or any other guys can help you. It's not just me. We're a group of people, and we're all passionate about this. They're as passionate as I am. And it's a great group of folks. So if you don't get me, any of the guys can help you out here. If not, all of our email addresses are listed on the Total Seal website, of course, totalseal.com. And just anything you got, just throw it at us. We'll do our absolute best job to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Keith. He's Keith Jones, the Director of Technical Sales for Total Seal. I'm Joe Castello, and this is another edition of Hidden Horsepower. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Write a review if you like it, and share it with your friends who will enjoy the content. More to come in the upcoming year. Keith, thank you again so much, and we'll see you next time right here on Hidden Horsepower by Total Seal.